Can you hear me, guys? Hello? Great. Okay, super. So we'll give, let's say, another 3-4 minutes so the other colleagues can join. Just to have an idea of the countries which are presented. Can you let me know your countries? Guys, can you still hear me? If you hear me, please, can you write down the countries from which you are, just to have an idea? So I see we have Bulgaria, we have Slovakia. I suppose, okay, Poland is with us, perhaps Finland or Baltics, somebody I know. I know should be from Baltics, most likely. Okay, so 3 more minutes and then we will start. Can you hear me loud and clear? Good. Okay, don't go. Let's try to solve that a little bit. Maybe now? Or maybe now? How is better? It's better right now? Okay, also for everybody else? Great. So, super. Well, 2 more minutes and then we'll start. Are you at school right now or are you in holidays? Okay, guys, so let's start, and if other participants will come, they can join later. So, welcome to the acoustic training. This is composed of 2 parts. The first part of about 1 hour and 15 minutes about the sound insulation, and the second part, which will be hosted by my colleague Karsten from Saint-Gobain Ecophone, which is going to deal a little bit more in detail with the issues of acoustic treatments. So let's start. Now, I'm sure you already know this by heart. When you speak about comfort and when we speak about the comfort inside the multi-comfort house criteria, one of the main criteria is also the acoustic comfort, because peace and quiet, it is needed. And one of the main reasons, and we will discuss it briefly in the presentation, is the fact that, okay, too much noise or noise in general, it has some adverse effects. And today, according to the estimation, about 80 million of the European citizens, that would be around 20%, are exposed to unacceptable high noise levels, which will induce to these people an adverse health effect, such as stress, heart attacks, hearing damages, or high blood pressure. And the estimation, they are going even further, and they are saying that about 170 million are living in what you can call as some kind of a gray area, places in which noise, it's not loud enough to generate health issues, but on the other hand, it's loud enough to create a serious annoyance. So this being said, now you can understand also why in the criteria that we are having, you have a series of acoustic comfort criteria dedicated for dwellings, or dedicated to the insulation between dwellings, dedicated to the insulation between room of the same dwellings, and also dedicated to the protection from outside noise. And in the incoming slides, I will try to tell you very briefly about all of this. As I'm not having, I'm not able to hear you, because this is more going one way, let's say, and I can only see your whatever you write on the chat. Please let me know if the quality of the sound is okay, and if you can all hear me. That's one key question. So, few things about the agenda. Thank you, Alexandra. Some basics in acoustics, really brief. Some general information about the European noise policy, just to give you an idea and to understand a little bit what we are speaking about. What it means acoustic comfort and what are the Isover acoustic comfort classes. And last but not least, some ideas of acoustic design to give you a flavor and to help you within your general overview, but also when you try to select specific details for given situation. So the science or the knowledge of how to deal with sound exists for many years. Even from Greece, you have these beautiful theaters in which you have a great acoustic, and in which you are able to hear whatever the actors are saying without having to ask for speakers or microphone. So we know to do it. It's just a question if we are willing to do it. Now, what is sound? Sound is basically a form of energy which is traveling away from a vibrating object. In this case, you can consider it the strings of the violin. And then these waves arrive to the human ear, which are interpreting it, which are sending an impulse to the brain, which is interpreting it, and this way you get the sensation of sound, of hearing. This sound can travel through air, or they can travel through a liquid such as water, or can even travel through the substance of the building, which can be bricks, which can be concrete, or whatever. When you speak about sound, you will hear most of the time everybody talking about decibels. Now, how much is 1 decibel? Because this is a logarithmic unit, and sometimes saying a figure like 10 or 20 or 100 doesn't give you exactly a feeling. So if you take a look, these are some ideas, and you go to a big rock concert, you will be at around 110, maybe 120 decibels. When I'm speaking to you right now, it's perhaps somewhere in the proximity of 50 or 60 decibels, depending on how loud the speakers on your computer is giving. And if you go, I don't know, in a quiet area, in forest, let's say, and there is nobody making noise and there are only leaves and a little bit of light wind, perhaps you would be somewhere around here at 20 or maybe 30 decibels. This is to give you a feeling or estimation of how much it means 1 decibel. Now, as this is a logarithmic unit, it has some strange, some ways of adding which could appear strange. I'm not going to enter into formulas, but just to give you some hints if you want. If you put 2 loudspeakers, it doesn't mean that you will have 2 times the noise when you express it in decibels. Or if you have 1 loudspeaker of 40 decibel and you put another speaker with the same power, you will get in the total 43 decibels. And this is because it's a logarithmic unit and you have to add it as such. Or if you prefer, you can have the example below in which you have 2 different loudspeakers, one which is much more powerful than the other one. If I would add not 1 but even 10 small ones, I will basically make no difference in the overall sound power. And just to give you also again a rough idea how you can calculate this or how can you estimate this, there are some rule of thumbs, and then you can see if the difference between the 2 noise sources it's or between 0 and 1, so basically they are similar, then you will get an increase of about 3 decibels up to the moment when if the difference is too high between the 2 sources of noise, basically you will not get any increase. Then just an image of how we perceive sound. You know, the sound it's traveling through the air, for example. It gets to the ear, and here with the internal mechanism it will be decodified, if you allow me this saying, and then it will be sent it to the brain, which will interpret it and say, okay, now I'm hearing some birds, or now I'm hearing some neighbors making some noise. That would be briefly speaking about noise in general, and the short introduction about the decibels and how can you estimate it, and the way we are hearing. If during the presentation you have any questions, please don't hesitate, write it down, and as soon as I see it, I will try to answer to you. Now, as I was mentioning earlier, today we are having 2 trainings. One is dedicated to sound insulation and the other one is dedicated to the acoustic treatment. Now, it might or it can seem confusing, therefore I would just like to show it to you and to make it clear for you. So, if this is an incoming noise, imagine that somebody is seated here and he has some nice speakers here and he's hearing to some music. Now, the noise coming from these speakers will hit the wall between this one and the other one here, which let's assume he's a little bit stressed, yeah, because he's hearing too much noise. So you can see he has his hair up. So if I'm going to discuss about sound insulation, then I will be interested in the part of the noise which is coming on this side, on the other room, if you want. While if I'm going to speak about the room acoustic, then the reflections of the sound generated by the waves traveling through the air and hitting this obstacle, it should sound in a nice way. I should have, if possible, no echo, so that the quality of what I'm hearing in this room is good. So if we split it, if you want, if the noise source or the sound source is here, then the acoustic treatment and the second part of the training will deal with what happens in the room where the sound source is, while the sound insulation will be treating with what happens or how much sound gets to the other room. And you can change this considering here outside, and instead of a speaker it could be a track, and again I'm inside and I don't want to hear the track. Or you can consider this one like a concert hall, and instead of the speaker there is somebody singing without any speakers, just with pure voice, and you would like to be able to hear him in good condition. This part could be taken or solved through acoustical treatment, while the other part would deal more with the sound insulation. Is this up to now? Good. Now, we will focus, as I mentioned to you, on this part for the first session. So, when you speak about sound insulation, first we need to understand a little bit the types of the noise that we are speaking about. And if you are looking at the different types of noise sources in a building, you can split them in, let's say, 4 big areas. Now, the first one, it will be the one coming from outside. Yeah, it can be cars, planes, dogs barking, or whatever, you name it. The second part would be interior noise coming from loudspeakers. So basically, this is a noise which is traveling through the air, therefore called airborne noise. The same like this one here, traveling through the air. Then you have a third possibility, in which somebody if you are living in a multi-story house, I'm pretty sure you are well aware of it, in which somebody which lives, let's say 2, maybe 3 floors up, decides to make a schnitzel. And then the moment that he is preparing the meat with the hammer, you will know it that somebody is making a schnitzel. Or if somebody is deciding to hit a nail, or to drill something, or even somebody walking upstairs with high heels. This would be impact noise. And last but not least, you can hear this better when you go to sleep. It's the noise coming from the different equipments. This can be HVAC, it can be a washing machine, it can be the elevator, or the pipes when somebody opened the water at a higher floor and the pressure is too high, and then you hear this groaning noise from your bathroom, and you say, okay, what's happening? Actually nothing happened, but somebody just opened the water at I don't know what floor. Now, when you speak about airborne sound insulation and airborne, The way to refer to it to refer to this type of sound related to sound insulation means that basically the energy and the sound will come from this side. It will hit an obstacle. One part will be reflected, another part will be absorbed by the obstacle itself, and the third part will escape and go through to the other room or to the other space. For us, what is important in this case is that this part is as small as possible. It would mean that basically no sound passes and you cannot hear it in the other room. The way to characterize different construction, such as this one, to give you an idea of how much insulation they are providing, is to use some kind of measuring. And the mostly used indicators in this case will be either something that you can see here and is called LW, weighted sound reduction index, or you will hear or you will see the DNTW, which is the weighted standardized level difference. Again, I'm not going to enter too much into detail. It's not my wish to transform you all in acousticians, but I just want to give you some hints and some feedback that next time when you see something, you understand a little bit for where it's coming, and if you need to know more, to know where to go and search for it. Now, the LW, which is the weighted sound reduction index, it is measured in the laboratory. They are taking this wall from here, they are placing it in a laboratory in between two rooms. They are putting a sound source here and the microphone here, and then they are measuring and they are able to say how much noise this element stops. Basically meaning that higher the RW, better the sound insulation provided by that element will be. A second indicator would be the weighted standardized level difference. This it's slightly different from the laboratory measurement and a little bit more closer to reality, because as you can see here, it is closer to the reality, meaning that it will be measured in situ in the real building, and in the real building the sound will not only propagate in your room like this, but also through here, through the ceiling, or like this through the floor, which means that the DNTW is lower than the RW, but closer on the other hand to the real life situation. Just to show you also how a measurement or a sound sound reduction curve looks like, you can see here, basically this is the way that shows how is the performance of a certain element along the frequency spectrum and how much he insulated. Now you can imagine here there are a lot of measurements and a lot of values for the different frequencies for which this structure is measured. In order to avoid giving all these measures, this RW it is given, which is basically an average of all the measurements. It's not the exact one and is not representative for each of the frequencies, but it's basically an average and it is expressed this way to make a little bit easier the job when you try to select, okay, let's say I would like to have a partition wall, or I would like to select a window, or I would like to select a door. Instead of getting 24 values for each of these, you get only one, which is this RW, and you know, as we already discussed, that our scope is that this one is maximized. Yeah? Higher this value, better the sound insulation of the measured element. This would be again really briefly about the airborne sound insulation, airborne sound insulation, to have an idea when you look at the measurement, or if somebody tells you that my construction makes, to be able to feel it and to be able to estimate it a little bit. Any questions? No questions? Can you still hear me? Good. Okay, now going a little bit further, the second type of noise that we'll discuss is the impact sound. Now, if the first one that we have discussed, the airborne sound insulation, was traveling through air from outside or inside the building, this one, it has the specificity of traveling through the structure. So basically it's a structural borne sound. It appears when you have an impact between two hard surfaces. Again, like we said, it's either a hammer, either high heel shoes hitting. And the specificity of this type of sound is the fact that once it happens here, it will go through the structure, and basically you will hear it from more than one point. This is why a noise which will happen at the higher floor somewhere here, it will travel all along the structure of the building, and you will be able to hear at the first floor, although this is the 10th floor that it happens. And because the buildings are structurally connected, and they are forming most of the time solidarized structure, this type of noise, they can travel very easy through the building and you can hear it very easy. This is one of the most challenging type of, or I would say the most challenging type of noise to insulate. And if you do not solve it correctly from the drawing phase, in order to solve it, it will be much more complicated. Only by looking at this picture and compare it with the other one, you can already think about the effects. I would add briefly one white paper, and I'm just drawing a section, okay, in which I'm having let's say some apartments. Now, if I have this type of structure, so apartments on this side and apartments on this side, it's very schematic draw, and I'm having some kind of speakers here, as we said, and I am sitting here. Yeah. Then if I want to stop this noise, it will be enough to focus on this part, and then I will not have problems with the noise. But if instead of this I'm going to have like a hammer here hitting, then this hammer will go, the noise will go like this, it will go like this, and it will go also like this. So if I solve this wall, I will still have some path for the noise to come, and I will not have the same effect as previously. Therefore, it is more important to solve in this case of noise, of air impact sound, to solve it here where the source of the sound, the source of the noise exists. How do you measure it? It's slightly similar to the airborne sound insulation. It is the indicator, it's L'(NTW), weighted standardized impact sound pressure level. But in principle, you measure it also in the laboratory. You have this tapping machine here. Here you will place your slab construction and you measure here. Now, there is a big difference between the L'(NTW), or the measurements for impact sound, and the measurements for airborne sound. If the first one, the LW, we wanted it to have it as high as possible, because this will tell us how much noise the structure stops, and therefore if it stops more, it's better. In this case, our L'(NTW), it is equal to whatever this microphone gets here. So the scope is to do it as small as possible, because this will tell us exactly how much you hear here below, and if you have it lower, means hearing you less, means better. This is one of the big differences. This is due to the way that the standards were done many years ago. Actually, today the acousticians, they are thinking to bring them in the same way of characterizing, and to find a new indicator instead of this one, which would be also good if it's higher. But for the moment, just bear in mind that when you speak about airborne sound insulation, you need to have this RW as high as possible. And when you speak about impact sound insulation, you need to have this L'(NTW) as small as possible. And again, this value is basically average value. It's not the value given for each of the frequencies of the spectrum for which the construction is measured, because the total behavior of the construction is this one. And you would get, again, if you say, okay, I would like to design a house and I want to select the floor, then you speak with somebody who is providing floors, then you say, okay, what about sound insulation? And he would give you for each of the construction 20 something measurements. This would be quite complicated. Therefore, they will give you this L'(NTW). So that would be about the different ways of characterizing and ways of measuring the performances for both impact sound insulation and airborne sound insulation. Any questions up to now? No questions? Donko, you wanted to write something? Sorry, I didn't see it. Will you explain how to measure it in our projects? Well, what you will do in order to estimate the type of construction that you need is that now you know what you should look for, and you have here some criteria, and you would guide yourself about this criteria, which is saying that, okay, between dwellings, for example, you would have a DNTW which is higher than 58 decibels. So then what you can do is, for example, in your case, you go to the website of Isover Bulgaria and you search on the construction details that the colleagues from Bulgaria have, and you find one which is fitting to this one. Or you go on the website of the student contest and you select from the details existing there one which is suitable for your requirements. We are not going to ask you to measure it. I'm not going to ask you to measure it, and the idea is not that nobody will look if you, or at least I am not going to look to see if instead of 58 you have put it something of 57.5. It's not, the idea is not to transform you into acousticians. The idea is to tell to you that you need to take into account these different dimensions of comfort to see how they are interacting into it, and to know where to go and to search when you will be an architect and you will have to solve something. It's like saying, okay, I'm going to build I'm going to build a residential construction, and at the last floor I'm going to build discotheque, let's say. Well, in this case, you have to know that you are going to have a challenge, because if in this discotheque everybody will start to dance, it's not going to be only the problem of the noise generated by the speaker and by the music, but also you'll have to deal with the noise generated by the people dancing, by the high heels and so on. The moment that you are having all this information, you know in which way to look and you know in which way to select. Okay, so when sound, because sound is everywhere, become noise, or what is noise? Many of definitions, but I would say that noise, it's a sound that you do not want. It can be the most beautiful concert of Beethoven, but if you really try to sleep and the neighbor puts it at 1 o'clock in the morning or 12 o'clock in the evening or 11 o'clock in the evening, then for you it's no longer sound, it becomes noise, and you would do anything to stop it. So briefly applying it this way, sound becomes noise when that type of sound is no longer wanted. Noise is any kind of sound that you do not want to hear. In some cases you can stop it very easy. You can turn the TV on, but if the TV is on the other side, then it's much more complicated to turn it on, unless if you don't have a good insulation, unless you have a good relation with the neighbor and you can ask him to turn it down a little bit. And as we already mentioned, if you are exposed to too much noise, you will have a low quality sleep, or either you won't sleep at all. You will have problems with your health. Either you'll have a too high blood pressure, either you will be in some kind of heart problems, and it will be also, or it can generate a permanent stress and also problems in concentration and in communication. Imagine trying to speak with somebody when there is a huge noise around you. You have to raise your voice. You have to almost shout. This is stressful. Or imagine trying to think something creative when around you there are plenty of people crying, screaming, speaking, discussing, and so on. This is basically a stress, generating a stress, and you will not be able to fulfill your task in the best way. And as we already discussed briefly about this, there is a huge number of people in European Union, not only, because this problem you will find it also in other countries, which are having which are exposed to really high level of noise. These are coming from the European noise policy, and these are documented data from this European policy. You can see them, and you can even search a little bit more if you want. So now we know that a huge number of population is affected by noise, and this is something that in the constructions of the future we should avoid as much as possible, and therefore we need to take it into account from the beginning. We need to know how to put it in place. The next question, if you know that there is a lot of noise outside, and now we know also that there are several types of noise, like airborne noise or impact noise, and we know that they are measured in decibels, and we know that there are existing some acoustic tests which are telling me for airborne noise how much is the RW, or for the impact noise how much is the L prime and TW. Which ones I should select, and what would be the good value? Well, first of all, looking at the same type of the sources of noise in the building, what we have done more than 10 years ago, we have done a study analyzing the different airborne sound insulation in Europe. You can see here that in Europe, at that point, because meanwhile there were some changes, but not significant, there is a huge difference between the legislation in the countries, between what the norms in one country say should be the sound insulation, and the norms in another country. If you just look, for example, Norway, it's in case of, let's say, with yellow, multi-story houses. So in the case of apartments, if you look in Norway, the legislation says, okay, you should be at around 55 decibels insulation between apartments. While in Italy, for example, you are at 50. Now, there is a big difference between 50 and 55. And you can see that there are a lot of differences, not only for airborne sound insulation, but also when you look at impact sound insulation. For example, in terms of legislation, at that point, the worst case was in Russia, where the legislation was really poor, and the best case was in Austria. And the difference between this one and this one, it's what, 47 to 65, 18 decibels, which is huge. people in Austria and people in, for example, Ukraine, or people in, I don't know, Italy, they are not so different in terms of human body structure. We are all reacting in the same way to the noise. But it's only that the regulation and the regulation body at that point in time, and also today. Why it's Ukraine red? Because, Boris, this is something that I've put it myself in the study. Initially, the study was not containing Ukraine, and as you can see, this is a norm P1277. I believe I founded it something like 4 or 5 years ago, so a little bit later than the initial study. So I added it in red. It's nothing special. I just added it in red, and I added it for training on acoustics, which I did also in Ukraine. No problem. So again, there is a huge difference in legislation, but the people are the same. Therefore, how to interpret that? Now, I believe that the next slide you will find it extremely interesting, because it gives you an idea of what it means for the end user. Now, for the end user, if you do, for example, a construction, or let's say row houses, you put the partition wall between two apartments in these row houses, R' W 53. Now, if you do that, about 40% of the persons living there will find your condition satisfactory. Only 4 out of 10. Now, if you look here, 53, it's this one. So all these countries, or in all these countries, only about 40% of the population will find the conditions satisfactory. And if I go one step further and I look at the next level, which is 58, it will be 60% only. So 6 out of 10, which means that 4 people out of each 10, they will find the conditions unsatisfactory, and they will not be happy with the comfort that they are provided in their apartment. And this, if we go back to the graph, 58, it's about here. Yeah. So if I summarize all of this, it means that basically about 40% of the population living today in European Union, they are not happy with the conditions. At least 40%, they are not happy with the acoustic comfort in their apartments, and even more in some countries that can be even higher. Now, based on this study, we have found out that you need to aim for 63 to be able to get 80% of the people finding the condition satisfactory. And the same in the case of impact, because this is for airborne sound insulation. In case of impact sound insulation, you should aim for as low as 48 to get around 80% of the people that will live in the building, in the construction that you will design, to find the acoustic condition satisfactory. And this is why we ended up with this criteria. This being the minimum, and this being the one you should target for according to the multi-comfort house criteria. Would that be clear up to now? Do you understand the reasons and what are the connections between how much insulation you place, and how many people will find your construction satisfactory from acoustical comfort point of view. No questions? Okay, good. Let's go further. There is always a question related to the cost, saying, oh, but doing acoustic comfort, it will cost more. And the answer is no. Acoustic comfort does not cost more. If you do it properly and you take it into account from the design stage, it will not cost more than a standard building. It's just a question of doing the right choices and doing the right design. You can see here, for example, this is a study which was done in Austria, showing the differences between two houses, one costing 1,800 and the other one costing 1,200, but with the same acoustic behavior. And if I select, for example, this one and this one, you can see that there is a huge difference in terms of acoustic performance, and the second one is even cheaper than the first one. So in the end, it's a question of how you design and how you look at the design from the beginning. And this is something that I will try to present to you in the next slides and just give you some ideas and some hints. And I will link also to this to state that, for example, in some cases, you don't need to reinvent the wheel. It's just by simply correctly positioning the building and the internal structure of the building against the noise, you can solve a lot of the issues. So acoustic design, some of the main directions of acoustics design. There are several ways that you can make sound protection. Imagine this situation in which here you have a road on which you have cars, then you have some space between the road and the house, and of course in the house there are some inhabitants. How can I reduce the noise? Well, a first situation would be I do it at the source. By doing it at the source, what I can do is, for example, instead of having diesel trucks, I could say, if I am the mayor, that in my city there are only electrical cars. Okay, can you see it right now, Donko? The others, you see the slide? Still not loaded? Yeah, I would prefer that it's loaded, so okay. So as I was saying, you can do some things at the source. Either you say, okay, I will take the the heavy traffic and put it out of the city, or I will develop some kind of asphaltic mixture which makes less noise when cars are walking on it, or instead of diesel cars I have electrical cars. That is one point that you can do. A second point that you can do, you can do something here between the source and the space that you want to protect. What you can do? Well, either you put some trees if you have, and if you install large enough barrier of tree, that would be okay. Or if you don't want to do that, then you can put some sound barriers like this, like they are on the autobahn, and then all the noise coming from this track will be reflected back, or the biggest part of the noise coming from the track will be reflected back. This is the second part that you can do. And last but not least, you can do something here at the source. What you can do at the source? Well, of course, you can insulate the building and properly adapted it to the noise. And this would be the third part that you can do. I'm not going to focus on the first one or on the second one. This is more general, and I cannot influence it, or Isover cannot influence it in a big way. But I will try to tell you a little bit more about sound protection and acoustic design at the level of the space. So some of the main idea. First of all, you should take a look at how you plan the building subdivision. Then we are going to speak briefly about the building envelopes, the interior partition, about the HVAC systems, and last but not least, how to avoid acoustic bridges. Now, plan the building subdivisions. If my noise, like we've seen here, it's here, I'm not going to put my dormitory here or my sleeping rooms. It is better that here I put something technical and I put the rooms like this, avoiding the sleeping room, avoiding the direct exposure to the tracks. This is not going to cost me anything. It's just a question, how do I design it, and if I did it from the beginning. Then what I can avoid? Well, it's better to try to avoid the situation in which you have the bathroom of the neighbor here and the sleeping room of the other neighbor here, and eventually you put also the bed here while the sink it's here. This is not good in terms of acoustic design, because it will be very easy to hear all the noise coming from the sink. A second idea related to this, it is good if by looking in at the plan in plan view, and your stair will be like this. Okay, let's assume you have some kind of circular stair, and on it you have some kind of building like this. Well, ideally, do not put a sleeping room here close to the stairs, because again you will have people walking on the stairs, and by putting the wall directly to the stairs, it will not be enough. Instead, you can always try to, I don't know, let's say have some kind of buffer space here, like a corridor, and then putting your sleeping room or selecting your sleeping room like this. Another idea would be, if as we already mentioned, either you put a buffer space, a corridor, like in the drawing here. Say you put a corridor here. If not, what you can also do is somehow similar. If your noise source, let's say it's going to be again some kind of a track, which is here. Try to place your technical room here, and then you have your sleeping room on the other side. Or you can place here some stairs, or you can place here some other functions which are not linked to those requiring acoustic comfort. And by doing this from the beginning, from the design, you will be increasing hugely the performance, the acoustic performance of your building. Now, in some cases, you might say that, okay, I really want to have the room here because there is a beautiful view. That view comes with the cost of the noise, but there is a beautiful view. What can I do? Then you can react at the level of the envelope. And there are several ways on how to place and to deal with this. There are ways of insulating the pitch-offs, there are ways of insulating the walls, and there are walls on the exterior, and there are ways to insulate the walls on the interior. So, for example, if you make correct selections and you think about it, then you should understand, for example, the difference between an insulated and uninsulated pitch roof. So you see, this is the curve of a pitch roof which is not insulated, and this one it's insulated. In this case, it was insulated with 160 millimeters of Isover mineral wool. And the difference between this one and that one is from 31 to 54. Yeah. Now, this value, I should interpret it also with the criteria, and I'm scrolling down to the criteria just to show you. Remember, we are having 54. What I'm saying is that exterior noise, because we are speaking about exterior noise, I should have not more than 25 decibels coming from exterior noise. Now, if I am allowed to have 25, and then I know that I had 54 plus 25, that would mean about 80 decibels. Now, 80 decibels, I can look very briefly on the data, and I'm seeing, okay, so light transport it's about 80, trucks it's about 90. So that would be okay. I would not have problems. Is this way of thinking, do I make myself clear? Okay, good. The same thing for the attics, because we were speaking about pitch roof, but you can also insulate, of course, the external walls. And you can see here, for example, again, a difference between an uninsulated concrete wall of 15 centimeter and the same concrete wall insulated with 200 millimeter of mineral wool. The first one, it's the wall, it's at 54, and if I insulated it with In this case it's Isover mineral wool for attics, you will get to about 65 decibels. And I can show you another solution, which would be, for example, I'm in a building and I moved to this beautiful residential building from late 18th century, and the facade it's having some stuccatures and so on. I'm not allowed to touch it. What can I do? Well, and the wall is brick. Well, you can do very easy some insulation on the interior, which will help you not only acoustically, but it will also help you with the thermal performance of the building. It will help you with the moisture management. It will help you in terms of the quality of the air and the relative humidity. But if we just stop at the acoustic, we'll transform a brick wall of 45 decibels to a construction that will give you 66. And this way you can be in the middle of the city in this beautiful late 18th century construction and not being disturbed by the fact that at 3 o'clock in the morning there are still people on the street having fun and listening to the music and so on. So just briefly showing you 3 ways of how to pick up good construction, how to compare it when you speak about the envelope, because we were speaking about the envelope. Any questions? Okay, I will go further. If we are speaking about partition wall and intermediary floors, because basically this would be interior partition. In case of a building, of a multifamily building, you would need also partition wall or intermediary floor. Now, when you look at the partition wall, you can go for a lightweight partition wall. Yeah, and in this case, what you would need to search for is that you ensure that partition wall is fully filled with mineral wool. This will allow you to get, for example, in this type of construction, which is 2 sets of layers of 2 sets of metal profiles and with plasterboard on each side, it would allow you to go again from 45 decibels to 67. 67, yes. And you know if you put this type of construction, then everybody in the building will be happy. I can watch my football game at maximum, while the other one can sleep very tight without having any problems. Then, as future architects, just few ideas. The fact that when you do a partition wall, it is important not only to draw it, but to ensure that on the construction site, for example, and not only for partition wall, but for the others, the installers are as close as possible to what you have written. And they are not forgetting to put, because you will have in the detail some elastic gasket here. And it's important that this elastic gasket is installed. And it's important that the way that you design, or the way that the design of the construction initially was proposed, it's also done on the construction site. This type of construction like this, which has a partition in between and here some slabs which are also insulated, it is very important to get it like this. Why? Because if somebody here will make not only airborne noise but also some impact noise, this slab here, it's insulated, so the noise will not go through. If By contrary, you will install it and you will stop the partition wall here, then the noise will go like this in case of impact. So this solution like this takes care of both airborne and impact, and it's designed taking into account the both type of noise that could appear in an apartment. And it's important if you selected the good design to also make sure that on the construction site, in real life, the person which are required to install it to use the correct techniques and to install it according to your specifications. Few words about the sound insulation in case of impact sound and what you can do in case of intermediary floor. Now, you remember this noise? You can see here the two ways that you can insulate. Either you insulate source, either insulate here. So at the source, meaning ideally in the apartment where the noise is produced. Either if not, then I am forced, especially in case of renovation, I am forced to try to find a solution in the apartment where the receiver is or below. So the first solution and the best one is the floating floor, which insulates at the place where the noise is produced. If not, you can use a false ceiling, also insulated, but the result will be not at all as high as previously. Now, an impact sound, the best way, as already mentioned, to insulate it is using a floating floor. Basically, what it means, you can see it here in section. It means that the floor on which the impact is taking part, it's split it. It's not connected to the structure of my building. If you look in a section and you consider the structure like this, okay, then if I make sure that I have installed some kind of insulation here like this, and then on top of it I have my final layer of, which is my slab, like that, it will mean that whatever sound I will generate, it will stay here and not go back, because there is no direct connection between the floor. Okay, so now I'm going to go back to it, and these are the main okay, so these are the main applications. Now, going higher, hey, Carsten, welcome. If I'm selecting this construction and I'm trying to play with them, for example, you can see here the difference, the measurements for a monolithic floor, which is looking like this. And the moment that I am selecting and adding this slab, you can see these applications. Okay, now it's better now? Now it's better? Okay, sorry. So you can see how much is this improving the performance of the construction from this level to here. So by providing and adding this slab, you can solve the impact sound insulation, and you can also solve the airborne sound insulation. And I'm going to show you very briefly also the impact that you are going to have from false ceiling, which you can see here. There are two types of false ceiling, and which is also improving, but not as much as the previous shown solution. We have Carsten with us. You are looking great. I think it's okay in Sweden, Carsten? Good. So last few minutes from my side. When you speak also about sound insulation, you should think about the HVAC systems. This is also important, and if you go on the website of Isover in your countries, you will find a little bit more about these solutions dedicated to HVAC. One of the systems, it's Isover, and Isover, it has a great performance. It allows you to install ventilation ducts and not to get this noise of pipes coming from everywhere. And I will spend the last 1 minute showing you also some figures about the importance of the Carsten. I think that it's a little bit off from you. Can you take off your mic for 1 second? Because I think there were some interferences.
Okay, I will try to do it.
Okay. So you just click. You should have the mic on off on your laptop. You are on a laptop or you are on a desk?
Yeah, but I can see it use mic.
Okay, no problem. We'll continue like that. Now, just remember, guys, one very important thing, that the total insulation of the building depends on all the components of that building. Because you can make the best wall, but if you select to put really poor windows, then the overall performance of your building will not be as good as you want. And I'm just going to show you some figures to have an idea of what it means. So if you do a good insulated structure, like for example let's say 50 decibels, and you have some really big openings into it, then the final result of that behavior will be much lower than expected. And you can see here, for example, in this example, one concrete situation. You have from an opaque wall and the window. The wall is 52 decibels. The window it's 35 decibels. Well, the performance of this wall it's not going 52, but only 44, 43 if you want, because the windows, this part, it's much lower than the walls, and because of this, the total behavior of your will be downgraded. And there are some tables which can help you, for example, how to evaluate this without going into many details. You will find this on the documentation. You will be able to download it. If you have a construction which represents, let's say, 90 of your building and 90% of your construction of the wall, and the windows are representing 10%, so the windows are only 10% of your wall, then if there is a much higher difference between the windows and the walls, you will get the final result, the RW of the window plus 10, not the performance of your wall, as we have been seeing here. So between my window and my wall there is a big difference. So what I got, if I'm looking here, I got about plus 10 decibels. So if I'm looking here, I would 35 plus 10, the result was 44, so almost plus 10 decibels. Last point, few words about the details. This is not necessarily for the design stage, but rather for the moment that you are on already with construction and you are on the field. Take into account to check the installers, because there are a lot of acoustic bridges on the construction and on the drawings. You have been selecting the detail because on the installation they were poorly solved. You end up with poor acoustic comfort performances. That would be from my side. If you have any questions, please let me know. I'm going to upload the presentations during this week or latest beginning of next week. So they will be shortly on. Well, first to Anna. Anna, you can either write to me, either you can contact your local Isover student contest responsible, which is indicated on the website of the contest. What do you mean that the task requirements are different? That's okay, no problem. Reach the minimums. I explain it here a little bit wider and a little bit larger. Okay, so thank you so much, guys, for this part. I'm extremely happy because I'm having a big acoustician with us, my colleague Carsten, who is working at Ecophone division, and he is going to take you through the second part of acoustics in the buildings, which is the room acoustics, which is a very beautiful part, and I love it a lot also because it allows you to work also, and it's closely related also to the visual. You can express and you can use different architectural accents, not only for the pleasure of the eye, but also for the pleasure of the ear. And I'm sure that with his presentation you will understand far better some of the gestures taken by the architects, for example, in opera hall, or some gesture taken by the architects in some churches, or some other gestures which are both serving the acoustic purpose but also the visual purpose. And I'm sure that this will be even more interesting because it will allow you to play a little bit also, or to think about how you can play with the texture. So thank you from my side. Ilian, can you please upload presentation for Carsten? And Carsten, welcome to the training.
Thank you. Can you hear me? You're okay?
Can you hear me? You're okay?
Yeah, loud and clear. All it's okay.
Good. Then I just wait for my press to come on. Okay. But you have echo. Okay. I have no clue what to do with the echo. Maybe I need some technical assistance.
If you have speakers, put the speakers on minimum volume to you. But it should have,
okay,
after I take off my microphone, it should be no problem.
Yeah. Okay. But then I hardly hear anyone, but that's fine. Is it less echo now? Oh, the echo comes from Gabriel. Now, wonderful. Okay. Now I think it's okay. Let's start. I remember from last time I did this, sometimes the internet connection went down a little bit. So in case that something happens, I will try to reconnect again as quick as I could. And just let me know after my presentation, you will have time to come with questions. And if you are too shy, or if you are, should we say, if you think you will have questions further on, you have my name and my email here as well, if you like. So now, my name is Carsten Svensson. I'm from Sweden, Ecophone, and I'm from the very, very south of Sweden, Malmö, and we have a very nice spring weather here at the moment. So no winter at all right now. I'm the market development manager of Ecophone, and I have a long history with acoustics. Especially, I started as an expert in school acoustics or classroom acoustics. But we work a lot with offices, hospitals, healthcare facilities, and also schools, of course, but all other buildings as well. Now, I hope that you can see my slides well, because now I will go further. So, just like Gabriel said, we move a little bit into the room, so the sound inside the room, and this is where Ecophone comes in. We work mainly with room acoustics, so that means the sound inside the room. Of course, we sometimes also face sound insulation aspects, just like Gabriel explained. I want to start a little bit on the top so that you understand. I think it's good for all of us to not only put the technical matters in the forefront. We have to understand exactly why we do things. And to me, I think it's clearly a case of sustainability. Everything we do and everything we should do in the future has to relate to sustainability at some point. And the concept of sustainability takes into account the 3 P's. So meaning people, planet, and prosperity. So planet meaning the environmental part of everything, right? Prosperity meaning the money, and people, obviously the people that will use, for instance, the buildings. I just want to start off with whatever you do regarding acoustics or lighting or anything, there is a connection to sustainable green buildings. It's good to know. And especially if you look at room acoustics, it's very connected to the people part, the social sustainability. And the whole reason of having a building is, of course, not only to just have a shelter for wind or storm or rain. We should also have buildings where people can perform well, they can work well, they can learn well, and they also can heal well if they are unfortunately in a hospital. There's a lot of good human payoffs for having good acoustics. Like some, I only mentioned some here. Increased well-being. You become less tired during the working day. You can concentrate better. You can communicate better. And you can perform your task better, and you can be more motivated. All these aspects are very connected to the social sustainability part. So just so that you know, whatever we talk about here, and also the fantastic possibilities you have in the future to create good buildings are clearly linked to sustainability. So what about sound and noise, and also sort of the philosophical concept of that? Sound is obviously the positive part, or more neutral part. Everything that you can hear, yeah, that is something that has to do with sound. But if you like it or not, that's another part. If you obviously dislike it, it's called noise. So the real, you could say, meaning of noise is unwanted sound you don't want. And you have some cultural aspect also of this, of course. Some noises or sounds are sound sometimes, but sometimes can be noise. Like, I don't know if any one of you have ever been to a Chinese opera, 4 or 5 hours of very high sound levels, banging all kinds of drums. To many Westerners, that could be very noisy. But of course, for the Chinese, this could be a very pleasant situation. Also, unfortunately, we have seen lately that noise, we obviously live on a very noisy planet. You have traffic noise, you have noise pollution, you have noise inside. It's actually so that even now, noise has been coming a part of even the video gaming or the computer gaming. So you can see noise pollution as video games today. which is obviously not a very fantastic thing. But if you can solve it, then it's a very good thing. So obviously we have too much noise in our society today, even so much so it becomes part of the computer gaming industry. Now, how does sound actually affect us? Well, if you listen to any sound coming from a sound source, which is obviously many times a human being, it comes to your head or your hearing mechanism, and the room itself will affect how you hear the sound, but also actually the shape of your head. If you have a very big nose like I have, it takes a little bit longer time for the sound to pass the nose and come to the other ear. But also the shape of your ears will actually matter. As you know, the elephant have very, very big ears, and they can actually move them around a lot, so they can catch the sound like a parabol antenna. So here you have that part, which is the physical region. If you actually go into the more physiological or psychological region here, it's a matter of two different levels. The first level is what I call the sensation. Most of us people actually feel more or less the same. If the sound is loud, we all feel that. If we have okay hearing, if it's clear or not, we also feel that. But the next level down here is your subjective preference, what you actually, if you like it or not. So your subjective preference can be different from some other person. So the room and the shape of your head, the sensation and the preference, all this together make up the final individual assessment of sound. That's very important for you to know. Many things we do feel the same, but still again, depending on the situation and who you are, can really also make you feel less disturbed or not. You have to excuse me a little bit. I have a cold, so I will drink some water in the meantime. You can think about this like if I make a blind test, for instance, for you, if you drink coffee, black coffee, or if you drink coffee with milk and sugar. If I fold your eyes so you cannot see anything, so you can only depend on your taste, I think 100% of all people out there would taste the difference between black coffee and coffee with milk and sugar. And that is on the sensation level, you could say. But actually, if you like coffee with milk or sugar or black, that is your individual preference. So that is a little bit the same with sound. So what is actually affecting us then? What physical properties? Well, number one, you have the energy. If I scream like this, I add more energy and sound levels will go up. So that is number one. Number two is the frequency. I don't know if you can hear it here, but I can talk with very high frequency. I can talk like this with a very high frequency. Or I can talk like a real man with a very low frequency. And these are some of the aspects that also matters. Number three, you have something that has to do with time. Sound comes to you after a certain time, or can come many times actually, like echoes. That is also something. We will get back to this a little bit later on. And fourth is, where does the sound come from? The directivity or the direction of the sound. Does it actually come from, do you hear it coming from where it actually comes from? That is the big question. And number five is differences between your two ears. In concert hall acoustics, you talk a lot about this too. If you have a too big difference between your experience of your right and your left ear, it's obviously not so good. You can imagine if you sit in a concert hall listening to some fantastic classical music, and you hear a lot here and you hear not so much at the other ear, or if you have low frequencies here and higher frequencies here, obviously it's not going to be a very amusing experience. And then you have, last but not least, something we call signal to noise ratio. That is the difference between the sound you hear or the sound you want to hear and the background noise levels. You can think about when you drive a car, for instance. If you have your radio on and you listen to some nice music and you drive inside the town, you drive 50 kilometers per hour, and then you suddenly come out to the highway and you speed up to 110, and all of a sudden you cannot hear well enough because the background noise levels have actually gone up, and they will mask and compete with the sound you want to hear. So if you do not have a very intelligent you could say sound system in your car, you have to adjust, you have to turn the volume up, and then you increase the signal to noise ratio. You should always have, I would say, 10 to 15 decibels more sound or difference between the background noise and the sound you want to hear, as to be able to hear more clearly. And actually also it's even worse for young children, and especially if they have a hearing impairment. Then you should have a really good signal to noise ratio. So these are the physical properties that affect us when it comes to sound. Just a few, maybe Gabriel showed you also a little bit, but just a few things. A lot of people think when it's really quiet, it's almost no decibels, but it's actually not true. If you can see here, just the humming from your refrigerator is actually 45 decibels. If you go out in the forest, even on a very nice day when you have little wind, the birds are singing and everything, I mean, you still have sound levels out there. So it's never really extremely quiet. That is a very abnormal situation. In an office, you know, if nobody talks or whatever, you could have 40, 45 decibels actually from just the sound from all the computers, lighting and pictures, and the background noise levels from ventilation. Normal conversation, we say usually it's 60 decibels. And you can clearly see if you listen to music on your MP3 or something at maximum volume, that could be over 100 decibels. So please be careful here. Do not listen too long time on very high sound levels. Make sure if you listen to music or something on very high sound or with a very strong sound, make sure that you let your hearing mechanism rest for a while in between the doses. That is very good for your hearing. Just a little bit also, maybe you saw some of this here, I will not do it, but just since decibels is one of the few concepts that non-acousticians actually have heard about when it comes to sound and acoustics. And since it's a logarithmic scale, it's a little bit tricky. Meaning if you have a sound source of, for instance, a car, 70 decibels, if you all of a sudden have another equally strong sound source, another car, it doesn't become 140 decibels, right? It becomes actually 73 decibels. And the reason I want to say this is, for instance, if you have, because sometimes you can see that when you have done an acoustic treatment of a room and when you measure sound pressure levels before and after, sometimes you can see that the sound levels went down, well, a few decibels, 4, 5, 6. And some people may think it's not really a lot, but energy-wise, it's actually really dramatic. I mean, if you have a decrease by 3 decibel in a classroom, that means actually you more or less kicked out 50% of the kids. So I mean, it's quite a dramatic sound pressure level reduction. So I just want you to know that whatever decibel you can reduce actually will really be very beneficial. Also, when it comes to frequencies, we'll get back to that, because in building acoustics and room acoustics, it's a little bit tricky. One can simply say that to take care of the low frequencies, or like 63 or 125 hertz, that is very hard, very tough. You have to work a little bit with that. But to take care of the high frequencies, it's easier. And we will get back to that when it comes to hearing and speech, because our speech actually consists of different speech sounds. And I will get back to that later on in some other slides, actually. And here we are. So normal hearing, whatever that is, you can say that here you have the decibel scale, how loud or how strong the sound is, and here is the frequency. So here is very low frequencies, and here is very, very high frequencies here, right? Now, if you see here in the middle, that is what we call the speech banana. And you can see that various letters or phonemes actually have different sound energy, but also contains different frequency spectrum. And that is very important for you to remember. So if we take the vowels, a, o, e, I, U, they actually contain quite a lot of sound power, meaning more decibels. Whereas if you look at the consonants, you can divide the consonant sounds into 2 different kinds. You have the voiced consonants, and if you put your fingers to your throat, you can feel your vocal cords are moving, like b, m, r, b. And then you have the unvoiced consonants, and they are very, very weak sounds, like s, ps, k, t. Actually more or less just air coming out from your mouth. These unvoiced consonant sounds are very high frequency sounds. I don't know if you can hear it, but you can try to make the sounds yourself. And they are very weak sounds. They contain little sound energy and are very high frequency. But in speech, they actually are the more important sounds, which is making it a little bit complicated. So you can say that the vowel sounds, a, o, e, they mask, they have a tendency to fight with these sounds. And when you work with room acoustics, sometimes you have to think about this. You want to sometimes take care of these sounds because they are already strong anyway. And maybe you want to support these sounds so that the speech will be very clear and understandable. So we will get back to that. Here you have the pain threshold. That is when you start to feel a real pain in your hearing mechanism, like when you're standing next to a jet fighter or something like that. You can also see here, this is the normal hearing threshold. So you don't hear any sound below this threshold, but when you come over this line, you actually hear the sound. So that means you can cleverly see here that the low frequency sounds, you actually need more sound power as to be able to hear those sounds. And here you can see that here it's the other way around, like 3000 hertz. Here it is, your hearing mechanism is actually really sensitive. So you very easily hear those sounds, even at rather low levels. So you can say that a screaming baby, a small child, they have a very high sound power combination with very high pitch or high frequency. So that will make you go crazy if you are in the kindergarten for too long times with many young children screaming all the time. But then again, you think about it, maybe that is how nature have shaped us, because if a child is having some danger or something, how can they make sure that adults and parents actually hear them well? Well, they have to use high frequencies and scream really strongly. So if we take a look at what happens to most of us, we actually get some kind of a hearing impairment. We actually lose the ability, unfortunately, to hear the consonant sounds. And this is not so nice. Many of us already at a very young age actually get some poor hearing due to various reasons, of course. And then these very important consonant sounds will more or less disappear. People will not hear birds singing and etc. So before we go a little bit technical, I just want to say, wow, what is the scope actually of acoustics and sound in society today? Why should we deal with these matters at all? Why are they so important? Well, there is a health aspect to it, and we already touched upon one part, the hearing damage part, for instance. Of course, you should never really get a hearing damage at all. And you can also, noise can make you very stressed and very tired and fatigued. So there is a health aspect. You also have a safety aspect, of course. You need to be able to hear warning signals in a building, for instance. It's also a communication aspect. Sometimes you want to be able to hear, and sometimes you don't. Sometimes you want privacy, for instance, between rooms. There is also an economic and financial situation that we have to consider. If people, because of very bad acoustic situation and noise over a long time, start to become ill and sick and do not come to work, you have, of course, a financial aspect to it as well. And this happens quite a lot, more than you think, actually. So a lot of insurance companies have figured out that this is actually quite a lot of money they have to pay out to people who have insurances. So that's why they now try with information to make people more aware about this. Then you have a social aspect and life quality. We human beings are very social animals. We want to communicate with, most of the time we want to communicate with each other. And if you don't hear well, in combination, well, it could be acoustic quality in combination with hearing problems. You isolate yourself and your life quality will be not so good. You can think about your grandmothers and grandfathers when they are at the birthday parties with a lot of screaming kids and in a very sound reflecting environment. They don't hear what people say. The only way you can make yourself understandable is to look at them so they can read your lips and talk straight to them, actually. So they isolate themselves. You can think about this when next time when you join a birthday party. Intellectual aspects, of course, especially in the learning area, the schools. Why would we invest money in a school if you don't hear what the teacher is saying? then you could just as well actually be home by the computer instead. So that's all a waste of money. And then of course we have the joy. You should not be irritated or frustrated because poor acoustics. That would be too sad. So here you can see a scope for whole society, why it is so important actually to look into the acoustic features, sound or noise, in the built environment. Okay, so now a little bit go into the how we human beings actually react to sound. What is the result if you have good sound or not sound? And this is research from Germany, from Bremen, and here measurements were done in schools, and you have the sound pressure levels here on this axis, so decibels, and here you have the time in the classroom. So this is in the morning hours of the classroom. When you measure sound pressure levels, you can see here the black one, you know, they go up and they go down. They go up and down over the morning hours. So that depends on the activity in the classroom and the school, of course. Sometimes you have concentration work, and sometimes you have talking and discussions going on. You can clearly see a trend here during the morning hours that the sound, even if it goes up and down, actually it goes steadily trend-wise up all the time to the lunchtime. Now, in this case also they wanted to look at the work environment for the teachers, so they checked the heart rate of the teachers, and to all of our surprise, actually you can see that it goes up and down almost parallel to the noise levels, which is kind of scary to see. So heartbeat, beats per minute, will go down when it's more calm in the classroom, will go up when it's noisy, and will go down again when the overall sound levels go down. You see the same trend over the morning hours, both when it comes to sound levels and heartbeats. So obviously, the more you come towards lunchtime, the more the sound levels and beats will go up. Then after that, after lunch, because then you have a break, then they will go low again, and then in the late afternoon they will go up again. So interesting to see a clear correlation between sound levels and actually one kind of a stress factor, which is heartbeats, in this case for a teacher in a school. In the same research, it's also interesting to see how when you look at a bad acoustic situation and then you make it good. So here we have before and after refurbishment of this school. So before, the acoustics was not very good, it was very noisy, and then they did something, they fixed the acoustic problem, and then we can have a different scenario. So if you look at the gray bars here again you have the sound levels, and here the classes during the morning session. Here you have in the not so good acoustic situation, so before they renovated the classrooms, you can see here clearly that noise levels go up during the morning hours, and it's quite a steep increase here just before lunchtime. Now, then they decided to renovate or to refurbish the classrooms. They improved the classroom acoustics, and they monitored closely that you had the same amount of people and that nothing weird or peculiar was going on. And what happened? You can see quite a dramatic decrease of sound pressure levels. And you look, two things happened. One was that the sound levels are on a much lower level, and two, it's more a steady scenario during the whole morning session. So obviously it sounds like that the class could more stay focused a longer time in the better acoustic environment. Very interesting to see a clear connection between the room acoustic interventions and human response, the human behavior actually. Very interesting. Here is another research. It's a new research from England. It's Essex. It's called Essex study. It was done in Essex. Here, you could say that you have 4 different classroom scenarios. The number 1 is a totally untreated classroom. This is a classroom which was simply the way it was from the beginning. Lots of hard surfaces, concrete, etc. The number 2 scenario, then they designed the room acoustically to meet the building bulletin 93. That is the minimum UK standard for acoustics. So the minimum standard in the English or the British acoustic standard for schools. Number 3 scenario is where they actually treated it a little bit better than number 2. They made it to the high level of performance of the UK standard. And number 4, they did the best acoustic solution, because here they treated it according to a BATOD standard, which is actually if your classroom have hearing impaired pupils, then you need to think about a better room acoustic quality and scenario. Also having a broad frequency absorption in this case, also taking care of the very low frequencies, 125 Hertz. And if you remember what I showed you before regarding how you can hear things, we said that the low frequency sounds can actually mask and compete with the high frequency consonant sounds. Now this is of course not a very good scenario, but if you absorb the low frequency sounds here, which actually that's what you do in the best solution here, then you pave the way for also that the hearing impaired students can better hear the higher frequencies, the consonant sounds, which are very important. So in this study, they actually had 4 different conditions. I repeat, 1, you make nothing. 2, you treat it to the minimum standard of the British standard. And then number 3, you treat it to a high level of standard, also in the same British standard. And here is the highest level for hearing impaired pupils. Now, this is all interesting, of course, but it's not interesting if you don't ask the people what they think. If you do not ask them, you will do not have the human response, of course. So that's why I show you the next slide, which is very interesting because you ask people to define you could say the acoustic quality of the space by using different kinds of words. Is the sound booming? Is it unpleasant? Is it reverberant? Etc. Is it the worst possible listening environment? Is it the worst speaking environment? Etc. And here you can see the 4 different situations. So when you ask the people, it is simply so that the worst room, the very untreated room, people thought this about this space. And the more you go into the middle of this spider diagram, the better rating the room gets from a human point of view. And you can see a complete correlation, actually. If you look at each treatment scenario, nothing, okay, better, best. You can see that is exactly what the people also think. Nothing, good, better, best. So people actually rated the place as the best speaking and listening environment and pleasant, etc. in here. And that is the scenario when you actually did something with the acoustic quality to the room. So that is a very nice correlation. Also, I would like to say, many of you have, of course, been to all kinds of parties. Now, if you come early to the party and you talk to a few of your friends, everything is okay. You hear everything perfectly well. Then you have 20 more people that will come to the party, and all of a sudden, you do not hear so well. So you have to compensate. You have to increase your sound power. You have to start to scream a little bit. In this room, in the Essex study here, interesting things is if you have the 4 different scenarios here, worst and best. If you look here, here we have 2 different sound level situations actually. This upper one is the voice of the teacher. The voice of the teacher. You can see in the very bad situation, the voice of the teacher was quite high up, 70 decibels. But you can also see that for each improvement you made in the classroom acoustic situation, the more the teacher could lower the voice levels, which is absolutely perfect. And that is okay. That is one scenario. But the second scenario is when you look at the noise from the children. That was lowered even more dramatically. So you had like a decrease here. If you look here, if you remember what I told you about the signal to noise ratio, that is the difference you need to have as to hear clearly. Now here you can see here is a difference here between the speaker of the teacher and the noise in the classroom generated by students, for instance. And you can see that in the very good treatment, both scenarios went down, and this went down even more. So you had all of a sudden you have an 18 decibel difference between the background noise and the teacher's voice. Clearly, you can hear better what the teacher is saying, and the teacher can lower the voice levels to a much more human way. It is not possible to scream 8 hours a day in the school. That is mission impossible. You remember what I said, 60 decibels was actually more or less people talking. So the teacher could go down to a very normal level. 70 decibels is not a normal level for speaking over long hours. So here you see also a very interesting effect on how the room acoustic design actually can clearly affect the users of the room. Now, easily, and Gabriel already told you a little bit, if you want to become acoustic experts in a very, very short time, it is more or less a matter of to know these 4 concepts. Either it's a matter of sound transmission, so sound goes through a building part and go through and come out at the other side. You can also call it sound insulation, of course. Here it's sound absorption. Sound comes to some kind of a building material, but does not come back. Of course, here you see 100% absorption, and that is it's really tough to do. Number 3 is reflection. Sound comes like this and hits the surface of the material and goes off like a football. So if you throw a football at a very hard surface, it will bounce off like this. That is called reflections. And the 4th concept is, you must not forget, it's also very important, it's called diffusion. Sound diffusion. If you have a surface which is rough, so not like this, right, where it's totally plain. When you have a rough surface, sound comes here and actually gets diffused and scattered back into all kinds of directions. So now we actually have created acoustic experts amongst all of you. It's very easy. If you know these 4 concepts, and these are what the acousticians use when they create acoustics for buildings: transmission, absorption, reflection, or diffusion. And it's always sometimes a compromise on how much you should use and what problem you want to solve. If you have, of course, a big highway outside the school, you don't want the sound to go into the school, you have a sound transmission challenge. If you have a very noisy classroom, you want to absorb the sound level so it becomes more calm. If you have a very long room, you may want to support the voice so the voice can travel also to the back seats in the classroom. Then you need to work with sound reflections. And also, and we will come to that later, it's not very good to have, should we say, big differences in sound in the room. It's much better to break up the sound so that the sound is traveling in all kinds of angles of inclination. So then it's good to have sound diffusion. I will get back to that. Okay, looking at room acoustics, what can you think about? Well, you need to think about the shape of the room. Sometimes you may have some really funny shapes you can find in churches and so on. You get some focus points if you have a ceiling which is like a dome, of course. You have to think about the size of the room. The bigger the room is, the more reverberation you will have. You have to look at all the surface finishes. Are they hard or soft, or are they plain or rough? And you also have to look at the furnishing. And why? Well, it's clearly connected to sound diffusion. Without anything here, sound will be more static in the room. But when you have diffusing elements like this, the sound will be split up, and there will be more a homogeneous sound situation in the room. Okay, let's go into a little bit some simple qualities that you need to think about when you design. Reverberation, clarity of speech, how strong the speech is, and something that has to do with open plan spaces, how the sound is traveling in an open plan space. Okay, number 1, reverberation. And maybe you have heard about reverberation time, which is actually the time it takes for sound to disappear. And you must actually think about when you design in the future any space, if there is any room acoustic quality that you may come across, it's most likely the very world famous reverberation time. That is what you can find in standards in many countries. So it gives you some time, like in a classroom, it should be maximum 0.5 seconds and something like that. But then as an architect and designer, you need to know what is actually affecting the reverberation time in a room. What can I do? How can my design actually quality assure that I do not get a too long reverberation time? Well, that's why we have this slide. Here we have 4 different scenarios. This here, you have a long reverberation time. It takes a long time for the sound to disappear. Here is more or less an empty room. So that is why the sound will never go away. It will just linger and stay on in the room. Here, B, immediately we get a shorter reverberation time. What do we do? Well, we put in a sound absorbing ceiling, for instance. You can see 2 things happen. One thing is here, you have immediately a drop in sound pressure levels in the very beginning when you start to measure. I will come back how you measure this actually. So here you get a drop, and actually this curve is more inclining a little bit. So with a sound absorbing ceiling, bloop, you have a decrease of reverberation time. Then something happens with a C, quite a dramatic decrease of the reverberation time. What do? Well, we put some bookshelves and cupboards and furnishing along the walls. You remember what I told you about the sound diffusion? I will get back to this, but it's important that you know that the sound diffusing elements like the bookshelves and cupboards, they act together with the acoustic ceiling by breaking up the sound energy in the room and sending it actually up into the absorbing ceiling. You really dramatically decrease the reverberation in the room. And then the D scenario, we put some furniture outside in the room, chairs and tables, and one more step is down. So you can see it's kind of a complex scenario. How can you as a designer think about the reverberation time? Well, you put some kind of an absorbing ceiling in, but you have to make sure your room is not naked without any furniture. That is not very nice. So you make sure you break up the sound energy and you use ordinary bookshelves or cupboards along the walls. And then further on you will have the tables out in the room. Very important to know the interaction between sound diffusing elements and the sound absorbing ceiling, for instance. Okay, why is this? What is actually happening when the sound fields in the room? And if you have a room here, like a classroom, for instance, if you send out some steady state sound energy in this room, or if you have 20 kids that will scream continuously all the time, you will fill the whole room will sound like this. Sound will be all over. But when you actually measure reverberation time, you do it by putting a sound inside the room, and then you turn off the sound and you measure how long time it takes for the sound to go down 60 decibels. That is how you measure the reverberation time. Now, that is why you have this scenario. If you turn off the sound, all the sound that hits the ceiling will be taken care of. That will be absorbed. That's natural. But if you have very hard surfaces here on the sides, like hard walls or even glass or something, the sound energy or the sound waves that travel here between the parallel walls will take longer time to disappear. And this will actually influence the reverberation time of the room. So that is why it's clever to have something along the walls to actually split up this energy and also send it up in the ceiling. So good for you to know, as if you're into design and architecture, is what is actually influencing the reverberation time. We have almost everything in the room actually. You have the floor, you have the walls and the windows, you have the ceiling, and you have some sound diffusing elements along the wall, and we could clearly see that these were very efficient. And then on top of that you have the furniture outside. So it's kind of to be able to influence the reverberation time in the room, you need to think about quite a few things actually. Almost everything you do in the room will actually affect the reverberation time. Okay, that's right. Now we come to a human quality number 2, which you need to think about in a room, and it's more or less so if you can hear clearly or not. Is the speech clear or not? Here we have something that I'd like to introduce to you. It is speech clarity. First, by looking at this picture, if you have a person talking to another person, you will have the direct sound coming here straight to this person's hearing mechanism. you will have something that we call an early reflection, but you will also have a late reflection like this, depending on how the room looks like. Now, if you have a direct sound here, this together with the early reflection is good. That is really good in room acoustics. But what is not so good is the late reflection. Because that late reflection will come to your hearing mechanism after 50 milliseconds. So all the sounds that you hear that come to your hearing mechanism within 50 milliseconds is good sound. That will increase the clarity of speech. But the sound that comes afterwards is not so good. That is called the late reflections. And they actually make clarity of speech worse. So, if you have all sound energy here within 50 milliseconds, you're okay. That is very good. And the more sound energy you have here compared to here, the better it is for your room acoustic clarity. Now, you can do this in two ways. Either you cut the reverberant sound, for instance with an acoustic ceiling, and if you cut the late tail, the reverberant sound here, you have more sound energy here compared to here. Or you can reflect the sound so it comes into here before 50 milliseconds, and then you can also increase the ratio. So these are the two things that you can do in your design. So the more early reflections you have, the better. Okay, that's good. Now we will move on to number 3, which is simply more or less, is the sound strong or not strong? Well, if you have 30 kids in your classroom screaming, sound will be very strong. And if you take away of them and have a very strong teacher, maybe the sound levels will go down quite a lot. Now, when you look at architecture and buildings, the tricky thing is, how can you measure something without people? Because that is important. Because then you know the contribution to the acoustic performance by the actual building. So you sometimes want to measure something where you don't have the people at all inside the building. Then you have a measure called strength, and it's good for you to know. So for instance, I just tried, it's kind of complicated in reality, but I tried to illustrate it simply here. If you have any kind of a room, this can be an office or a classroom or whatever, your living room, and if you go into this room and actually measure, here you have a loudspeaker and here you have a microphone. So if you send out sound here, you will record the sound here using the microphone. If you send out sound here, and if this room has very reflecting surfaces, a lot of the sound will come back and get into the microphone here. And then when you make a measurement like this, you can sort of compare it with a measurement that you have done already before in a very unechoic room, a dead room sort of. Because in this room you have no sound reflections at all. Here you only have the direct sound. So when you compare any room that you measure, and you measure sound strength, let's say if you get 70 decibels in this room, you just take minus the 60 decibel that you get in an unechoic room, and out comes the room acoustic descriptor strength. In this case, it's 10 decibels. So you could say the more sound reflecting surfaces you have in this room, the more noisy or loud will the room be, and the higher the strength will be. interesting for you as working with architecture, for instance, is that you can measure this according to international standards, and then you get exactly the performance of the room itself without any people in it. Because when you put people inside, it becomes more complicated. So here you get the actual building performance. How much is different surfaces contributing to the noise levels in the room? So that was number 3. Number 4, I'll get back to later, is more in an open plan space. Because if you have no walls, like in an open plan office, sound will travel very far away. And that is going to be not so easy to deal with. We call it spatial decay. That is how sound is actually disappearing over space, like in an open space, for instance. And I will get back to that later on here. So I touched upon a little how you measure. And when you measure acoustics in any kind of a room, you have a loudspeaker like this. This looks like a football. It's called an omnidirectional loudspeaker because you send out sound in all directions in the room. And then you have a microphone position. Actually, you change the position of the microphone. According to measurement standards, I believe you should have 5 microphone positions. So you send out sound here, and then you record sound in the different microphone positions. So then you send out this, it's called an impulse response. It's the acoustic response of the room, actually. You send out the sound. Unfortunately, I think you will not be able to hear it so well, but it sounds something like this. So it's from the low frequencies to the very high frequencies. Now you send out this into the room, and then you measure, you see what happened. Now, when you have an acoustician, they have computer software and they have the technical equipment you need. It's actually not so complicated. You get the reverberation time, for instance, and you get the clarity of speech, for instance, and you can also get the sound strength. So if you want to have an acoustician checking the quality of the room, they use these measurement techniques. That's how they do it. You can, of course, also calculate your rooms if you like. And calculation and mathematical formulas are becoming better and better. So there are different ways to, in acoustic standardization, for instance, when you want to verify if you have built according to a standard or not, you can verify either by measurements or by calculations. Okay, so this is the way you measure it. And if you remember, I just went through some of these human qualities here. Reverberation, clarity of speech, is the sound strong or not, and how is the sound disappearing in an open space. These are just human qualities. They are not technical qualities. These are human qualities. And you can measure them using different acoustic measures. And I will not go into this today, but these are totally standardized today. This is no hocus pocus. There are international standards for how you do this. You have different ways to look at the reverberation time. You have different clarity measurements. And also here it's more the spatial decay, the open plan. We use some of them. That's why I put the red here. But this is, it's totally out there and it's standardized. Okay, so what you do then, as when you design any kind of a space, well, it could be a school. You look at each space, for instance here, the classroom. And then you have the 4 different human qualities here. You have to decide which quality is most important for your class, for your room. In a classroom, yeah, you don't want to be too reverberant. You want to have very high clarity of speech, and you don't want it to be noisy. So all these 3, okay? In a kindergarten, for instance, you can more or less focus on the noise levels. because that is the problem you have in a kindergarten. In an open plan space, you don't have to care about this. You just have to care about spatial decay. How is sound traveling and disappearing over the distance? And this is how you actually go into each room and make your judgment. In a music room, well, it can be a little bit tricky. If you have classical musical instruments or acoustic instruments, you want to have more reverberation, more feedback from the room. But maybe if you have play rock and roll or heavy metal music or something, you don't want, you want to have a more calm room, because you can adjust the sound level at the piano and the guitar amplifier, of course. So sometimes you have to make a compromise. That's life. Okay, when you go into different types of absorbing qualities of material, it's important for you to know that every material that you have in any building have some kind of an absorption class. So that is the quality of how much sound energy does the material actually handle, and that is very important. If you have a sound absorption class A material, it takes care of almost all the sound energy coming into it. It's a little bit different depending on the frequencies. And then you can go down like this. Up here you have very good absorbers. Here you go down, you have not so good absorbers. And sometimes you come into an unclassified area, like just steel or concrete or something like that. So all the material that you will have in the building has some kind of an acoustic quality to it. It's also called a practical absorption factor. This here will absorb almost 100% of the sound. And here you can see they will absorb less. So when you look at, for instance, a sound absorbing ceiling and how it affects the different human qualities we talked about, you can see how can you affect the reverberation time? Well, the ceiling interacts with the sound scattering objects. I told you that the more stuff you put, like bookshelves and tables and everything, the better it will be. Sound level, how can the ceiling? Well, the sound energy will be absorbed, that is for clear, and the better your absorbing material is, the more sound energy will be absorbed and the less noisy the room will be. That is number 2. And here, what about the clarity of speech? Well, a ceiling can reduce either, you remember I told you about the late reflections, the reflections that comes after 15 milliseconds. They can reduce this in the room, and by doing that you create a good relation between the early and the late sound reflections. So this is how the absorbing ceiling will affect. Okay, now life is never too easy, right? When you put people into the room, it complicates everything, but it's also a wonderful challenge. Now, when you create spaces and design, you need to think about these 3 things. You need to think about what are the people doing, what is the activity. You need to think about who are they, what are they doing, and you need to think about what space am I in. So we move into an activity-based acoustic design concept here. So activities can be anything, like it's to have meetings, to have workshops, to concentrate or to multitask, to be when all of you are on the telephones all the time, or teamwork. So you have different types of activities. People, well, people can be different. It's how they perceive sound. It's also what they do and the performance, and if they want to communicate or concentrate. That's very important. So if you have this space here, this is an open plan office. Yes, you can make life easy and you can call this is an open plan office, but that is not actually the full truth. This is an open plan office, but depending on where you are in this office, you create and have different types of activities. And you need to think about that in your acoustic design, for instance. You need to apply the concept of activity-based acoustic design. If you know you will have teamwork going on here and informal meetings, you know this is going to be a more noisy place. You need to make sure that you have good absorbers, maybe some screens, or maybe some walls to screen them off, etc. If you want to have a more concentration area, for instance, or even a privacy area, you want to have confidential talks, you need to have really good sound insulation, for instance. So this is something you need to think about in the layouting of the space. If we move into a classroom, for instance, when you look at different activities, you have, for instance, the traditional teaching scenario. The teacher is talking and pupils are nicely listening. Or you can have a more dynamic group situation. Actually, they have a different acoustic wishes. If you look at the traditional teaching, for instance, the teacher is speaking, so there needs to be some comfort for the speaker. And the pupils, they need to be able to listen without any problems. If you have another activity, a group work, you need comfortable sound levels. It should not be too noisy. And also, you should be able to concentrate quite well and do not disturb the other ones. So because I travel a lot in the world, what is the situation in a classroom today actually? Well, in many places we have very high sound levels. It's difficult to speak clearly. It's not easy to concentrate. And sometimes teachers have overstrained voices. This is a situation that you have. Now, what can you do? Well, you can balance your room acoustic qualities. You can really, in your design, think about sound. How clear will the sound be? The reverberation of the room, and also the low frequencies, the 125 hertz, for instance. How can you take care of that in the acoustic design? Well, the most important thing is to understand how sound is actually affecting the human being and why you need to think about acoustic design. Here, according to research, you can see how is actually classroom noise affecting students. Well, it's affecting their memory, their reading ability, behavior, they get annoyed, etc., etc. These are facts we already have to face today. What about the teachers? They have voice problems, they have a stress problem, they also are annoyed and change their behavior if you have very stressy situations, and also you have to choose different teaching strategies depending on your acoustic quality of the room. If we take a look at reflections in rooms today, if you have a teacher talking and if you have a very sound reflecting scenario in any space, you can see that the blue here are the early reflections and the red are the bad late reflections. It can look like this. Sound gets bounced off all over. That's really not a very good situation. But if you actually put some kind of an absorbing ceiling in and also a wall panel at the back here, you take away the late sound reflections and you pave the way for the more good ones, the more early sound reflections. And you can increase the clarity of speech and make it more easy to concentrate in a room. You actually get a little bit more like outside. You bring the natural acoustic scenario inside. That's what you're doing. You take away unnatural sound reflections. So this is a nice classroom. Everybody is happy. You created a good scenario. The speaker can speak without any problems. All the pupils can hear and listen carefully. They get most early reflections, and you make sure you take away the late reflections, for instance. That is a very good scenario. There are different ways of thinking about this. In a classroom, for instance, you need to think about having an acoustic ceiling You also may have to have a low frequency absorber, which is a thicker absorber on top of the ceiling to take care of the 125 hertz. And also maybe you need some reflection over the speaker, the teacher, if they want to have some more feedback, for instance. So this is what you need to think about in a design of a classroom, for instance. Some ceiling, low frequency absorption in a U shape on top of the ceiling, and maybe also, if needed, some reflection here. Also, don't forget a wall panel at the back of the room, because that will take care of the late sound reflections. That is very important. Okay, we're coming to the end. You've been very good listeners. I think I have a few slides when it comes to offices, just because usually today people build more open plan offices, and they tend to be a little bit tricky to handle. And as I told you already, rooms today can be very have a lot of reflecting surfaces, and that means sound can travel very far away in an open plan situation, so you can disturb really far away. For those of you who are very interested in this, there is a rather new standard. It's called 3382-3. It's a standard for how you measure actually sound propagation, how sound is traveling in an open plan office. This is if you want to be a little bit nerdy and have a look at this. This standard exists. It's a few years old, but it's good. I'll touch upon it. In this standard, you have some measurements. You don't need to think too much about them, but this is the sound pressure level. It's A-weighted, so it's for speech, and it's at 4 meter distance. This is just one measure that you have, for instance. Now, here you want to know, of course, the level of the speech. Let me see here. Okay, yeah. If I go back here, what is the sound pressure level actually? So the more you take it down like this, the better it is. This is something you can measure. Also, you can measure the slope of the curve. How quickly is the sound actually decaying? So this is called D2S here. You don't need to memorize this, but I just want you to know that there are different ways to measure sound propagation in open plan offices. Has to do with the sound pressure level and how quickly the sound is disappearing. And why is this important? Well, if you look here in an open plan office, if you have some very noisy person sitting here and talking, this sound level, this speech will go far out in the room. If you have a room with very reflecting surfaces, sound can travel very, very far all the way here and disturb all these people here. If you have an acoustic ceiling, and also sometimes some acoustic elements over the people where they work, sound will travel not so far away. It will actually travel only here before it disappears into the natural background noise levels. So with your acoustic design, actually by introducing some absorbing elements here in an open plan space, you can make sure that the sound is not traveling too far away, disturbing the people who are far away. So you can actually decrease the disturbance rate. That's very important for you to know. There are some product properties I want you to know. One is called articulation class, and you measure this in a laboratory. So you measure how sound is traveling. You have a sound absorbing ceiling and you have a screen like this, and you measure. You have your loudspeaker here, and then you measure at different microphone positions at the other side of the screen, because then you can see the combination of the ceiling and the screen. How far is the sound coming and disturbing the people here at the other side? Interesting for you to know that there are some articulation class values of different kinds of material that you use. The higher the AC value is, the less the sound will travel in an open plan space. That is the only thing. So you remember a sound absorption class A, that means that the sound will not travel so far in an open plan office. And the more you go down, class C, class D, sound will travel further away. Speech sounds, so that will more people be disturbed. Okay, I want to end up a little bit with some vertical elements as well, so you know, because you can put stuff on the walls, it will actually happen then. So you have full acoustic ceiling, you have sometimes some free hanging units. That's what you need to think about. Sometimes you cannot have a full acoustic ceiling for some reason. Then you need to have as much as you can and put them somewhere. And then maybe you need to think about the next step in your design. What about wall panels? What about low frequency absorption? What about some acoustic screens between people? And what about some acoustic patches on the walls, for instance? So a few things about that before we finish the session. Here is a situation. You may have people sitting here, for instance. Your acoustic strategy should always be to make sure you take the sound or noise close to the source. So if you have people sitting here making noise, you can put something on the walls that immediately take care of the sound, making sure it doesn't travel and disturb to other people in the room. In this space, for instance, in this office, they have done almost everything they could do, which is fantastic. They have an acoustic ceiling on top. You don't see it. They also have acoustic elements just over where the people sit. They also have wall panels here, and they actually also have screens in between the workstations. This is obviously quite a sound intensive place. So in this office, they have done almost everything they could do when it comes to room acoustic design. A good situation. It's not always like that. So when you put stuff on the walls, how can you affect reverberation, time, clarity, and sound pressure levels? Well, if you look like this here, how can you affect this? This is a scenario with no ceiling or anything on the wall. You can see reverberation time is very, very long. Here you put a ceiling in, and also you put X amount of elements on the walls. You can see clearly that when you have something on the wall, like an acoustic patch or something, the more you put, the more you decrease the reverberation time. You go from 7% of the floor area, 12% of the floor area, etc. So you really can decrease the reverberation time. When it comes to clarity of speech, it's also really powerful to put something on the walls. You can see when you have 7% of the floor area, and the more you put in on the walls, the better the clarity of speech will be actually. Good is to separate the units. When it comes to sound strength, it's wall treatment, it's not so efficient. The best efficient thing is to have an absorbing ceiling. That's it. But with the vertical acoustic elements on the walls, you can affect the clarity of speech and the reverberation time. So, step number one to think in the design: try to have a full acoustic ceiling, and if that is not possible, try to have some free hanging units. And then, next steps: do I need any wall panels? Do I need any specific wall panels with low frequency absorption? Do I need any screens? Or do I need to put any vertical elements on the walls to further increase the clarity of speech or to bring down the reverberation time? Yes, Gentlemen and ladies and gentlemen, that is roughly what I want to say. I want to just tell you a little bit, like, if you need any other information regarding this when we are sleeping, we have a blog here, acousticbulletin.com, where you have access to wonderful news about acoustics and design. We try to put up a lot of interesting stuff there as much as we can. Acoustic Bulletin is a blog, but it's also a YouTube channel where you have a lot of movies. We're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, and we're on LinkedIn. So whenever you feel you want to know more about this, you can gladly go here. Actually, when I say here on the YouTube channel, you have hundreds of movies that you can watch regarding on what interests you have. If you're designing a school or an office, you can go. We have playlists for office or schools or healthcare buildings or general stuff. Maybe you want to listen to good acoustics and bad acoustics, you can also go here. Last year we had a huge global seminar with some 180 acousticians from all over the world. You can go to this website if you'd like to know more. We filmed all the presentations at this seminar, the 2-day conference. So you can go here if you like to see any of the films. Here we have the trailers, and here we have the full length. Films are about room acoustics, architecture, green buildings, psychoacoustics, or the different segments, or how sound affect people. You can choose whatever you like. So that is if you further want to know more about some specific areas, you can go here. All the materials is up and running and it's open to everybody. And when you go to these film areas, you can check the playlist here, as I told you. If you have a special interest, you just pick what you like. And if you like, feel free to follow me on Twitter or LinkedIn. It's perfectly all right. I'm quite active. Try to spread the knowledge about room acoustics in the world. So thank you very much. That was actually me, and I think it's 5:33, and we fairly made it. And thank you for listening. And I really hope it was not too much. I know maybe it was too much, of course, but at least you got some insights in what you need to think about. Feel free to ask me any questions if you like, and I will try to answer. And if you do not have any questions now or what so, you can always mail me, of course, also if you like. So that is what I would like to say. I hope you're all okay and that you have survived. All clear, thanks. That's perfect. That makes me very glad. Yeah. Thank you also, all of you. Thank you for listening. Yep, perfect. I will stay on some minutes here in case that there is any question coming up. Looks like you absorbed everything. Perfect. Okay. Don't know if Gabriel will take over or if we just more or less quit the sessions here. I know that Gabriel will put this up somewhere for you so you can have access to the material. Yeah.